Christian parenting.
Triangulation, manipulation, control, violence, deception, those are all like red flashing lights. I'm afraid. That's what those really say. I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I'm afraid, and I need to take control of my own life, and I don't know how to do it.
Beth, welcome. Thank you so much for being my guest today on Call to Love.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. This is just a blessing to me. I told you before we hit record, listeners, I'll go ahead and tell on myself. I've done a little bit of session stalking with Beth before at conferences that we've been at. And that's just because she's a fantastic communicator and her story is just so impactful. So Beth, to begin, let's just have you tell a little bit about your family and the ministry work that you've been called to.
Yeah. So I always say I knew I had a baby in my heart long before I knew there would be a man there. I mean, I wanted a family that was big and fun and built differently. I knew that from a pretty early age. And so my husband and I, our first adoption was 28 years ago.
Wow.
And we processed that adoption at the same time that we were curious if our bodies would work and make babies. I didn't know if the Lord put that desire in my heart because he could see that I would struggle with infertility, but that was not the case. So my first adoption and my first biological child are 6 weeks apart, and
That's amazing.
That's how our story started. And today we say we have 11 children, four boys and 7 girls, and 3 of those are biological children. The rest of those entered our family through adoption or through foster care. So yeah, they range today in age between 22 and 39.
Wow.
Yeah, fun, very fun family, built in all kinds of ways. But they like each other, and they like us, and they like Jesus, and that's kind of all I cared about.
That's a win. Absolutely. I love that. And then on top of that, you have done ministry work for a number of years. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so 29 years ago, my family my husband and I moved to Monterrey, Mexico, and we work and run a ministry called Back to Back Ministries, which has about 500 staff in 10 locations around the world, and we work with orphaned and vulnerable children in those locations, and all along the spectrum of care, everything from countries that have institutionalized care that we're trying to deinstitutionalize as much as possible, all the way to Strong Families programs where we're trying to help really vulnerable families stay together. We do that in several continents and in the United States. And then about 10 years ago, we started a trauma training organization called Trauma Free World, where we give free trauma training out. You can just get on the Trauma Free World website and get faith-based, evidence-based quality trauma training, and we've given that away to thousands of organizations and lots of families around the world. So this is definitely the adoption and foster care and OVC world has really been my life for the last 30 years almost.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, listeners, this is a very informed voice on many different levels coming to speak to us today. And what we're going to be talking about, as I shared in our intro, is helping our kids to identify and work through difficult thoughts and emotions. And honestly, Beth, I mean, this is a struggle for everyone at every age, and which obviously is why Scripture addresses it. But I love that you've created a resource for parents and caregivers to begin to teach this concept to our children from a young age and beyond, but especially this latest resource that we're going to talk about with your new children's book. Beth, I think it'd be a good place just for us to start in conversation of why do we need to be especially aware of this struggle and attuned to our foster and adoptive kids when it talks about their thoughts and their emotions and how they need to identify and work through those.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the Bible talks a lot about renewing our thinking and taking every thought captive and setting our minds on things above, and all kinds of verses that instruct us and inform us about how powerful our minds are. And it's true for all of us, not just our kids who have, come from hard places or have traumatic histories, but especially for them, where at very tender ages, people planted lies in their belief systems about who they are, or what's safe, or where they belong, or and so some of the work we do as full-time caregivers, whether we're foster parents or adoptive parents or are involved in some other way, is helping figure out what lies does a child believe and how can I be a part of removing that lie and replacing it with things that are true. But we can't do that without them. That is something we do in partnership with them. And so trying to figure out language to help a kid understand that this is going to be a journey we go on together, and this is what their part is, this is what our part is, this is what the Lord will do. That's been a really powerful experience for me with the kids that we basically, our foster story, it was basically with adolescents. And by the time they entered our house, they had some pretty established belief systems about who was and wasn't safe and what is and wasn't possible. And so just replacing that set point with things that were true and possible, that's the work that helped inform the children's book that I wrote.
Yeah, I love that. And, we talk about that a lot on the show that, because I'm very guilty of this. I want to just dive in and fix the problem. And I think that's true for a lot of us because we want to see the healing on the other side of it. But it takes a lot of laying the groundwork of creating that safe space so the child or the teen will partner with you in that. So, Beth, what are some practical ways that you teach to maybe encourage our listeners for creating that safe space for our kids so that they will agree to partner with us in that?
Oh, gosh. Well, if I only have like a few minutes with someone, I talk to them about two of the ways that we know the brain relaxes because of serotonin and dopamine and all kinds of things that allow us that kind of soft entry point is through being listened to and through play. So we know that the full attention of a attuned listener heals the brain. It makes someone feel loved and safe.
Yeah.
And so that means exactly what it sounds like, the full attention of an attuned listener, not like my hand is on my phone and I'm listening. I'm not, come up here and talk to me while I do this, while I fold the laundry. This is like, you have my full attention.
Yeah.
And I think that takes just self-control on my part, especially when you're managing a large household to try to recognize the most important thing I can do right now is to give my full attention to this child. And then play. I mean, play is so good for our brains. And again, kids with trauma histories maybe aren't even that good at play. And teaching them even how to play and then experiencing the bonding that can happen in play. There's a lot of good, sometimes we call it playing with purpose. It's like a lot of really good work can happen in the brain and the relationships when we play together. And so that is like one kind of like, if I only have a minute with someone, I'm like, listen to them and play as much as you can. But the other tool that I use in my life, and I have for a really long time, is I had a really challenging foster daughter, really challenging. And she'd been in my house 3 years at the point of what I'm about to tell you. And it had gotten so hard that, if I'm honest with your listeners, I just tried to wrap myself emotionally around her so that the consequences of her life did not impact the rest of my household. Like if her little bomb went off, I was the only one that felt it because I was afraid of the way her choices and attitudes in life were impacting the other kids in my household. And I was afraid either my husband or some social worker would take her away from us. So I was just kind of trying to protect her. But in the end, I didn't. In the end, what I did is I created a codependent relationship with her, which meant if she had a good day, I had a good day. If she had a bad day, I had a bad day. That is not, there's no healthy way to live. So I finally called out for help and got this fabulous professional to come observe us in our house for a little bit. And after he watched this interaction we had had before she went to school, he pulls out this piece of paper and he just drew a very simple tree with 3 parts to it: roots, a trunk, and like the foliage. And on top of the tree where the leaves were, he just wrote the word attitude and actions. And he said, Beth, I've been watching you for pretty much 3 days, and everything you talk to her about has to do with her attitudes or her action. Like cell phone, facial expression, curfew, homework, boys, I mean, all of it. And he just like drew a harsh line across the top of the tree. And he said, every time you try to change your attitude or actions, you're like cutting off the top of her tree. And he's like, don't you know anything about horticulture? You cut off a branch, it grows back twice as strong. And I was like, yes.
Wow.
And he said, her choices are a direct result And then on the trunk of the tree, he wrote the word self-image. And he said, they're the direct result of her ideas of who she is. And we had just had a fight about some inappropriate, promiscuous looking clothing she wanted to wear to school. And he said, it's not personal. She's not trying to, has nothing to do with you. She's literally, somebody told her that's where her value is. Her self-image is in this idea that her body is what has value. And he said, it's because she has some lies. And then he wrote in the root system of that tree, he just wrote truth and lie. And he said she has some lies down here in the root system of her life that impact how she sees herself, which impacts her attitude and actions. You're spending all your time at the top of the tree. It's time for us to go down to the root system. That's where transformation and growth and healing happen. And yeah, we went on to discuss how to do that, what that looks like. And it changed not only my relationship with her, but it absolutely changed the way I parented from then on out.
Oh, I can only imagine. And that's amazing. And shout out to the professionals when we call upon them, right?
Yeah.
And how helpful that is, because as much as we are trying to do things as best as we can, educating ourselves, we are limited, and it's okay for us to say that. And it's okay for us to come to points where we have to call upon the help of others, and especially that outside perspective. You may not have seen that, obviously, and it needed somebody who could just come in with an objective point of view and identify it right out. And I love that you talk about just how not only did it change that relationship with that child, but just your parenting in general. And I can definitely attest to that through my own journey of education as well. And I love that you talk about that root system and getting to the heart. And I think being patient and how long it takes. I mean, obviously every child is going to be different. They're going to have different times where they will allow you in, and it's going to take, different time frames for them to trust. And then you kind of start building on that foundation and the roots as you're talking about. And so I'm curious, maybe some practical ways that once you've kind of overcome that initial hurdle and you're building trust in that, kind of relational equity with the child, what are some practical ways that we can begin to teach them to identify lies, intrusive and misleading thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I'm going to be vulnerable, I'll say in the beginning, I thought it was going to be all about her. And I turned her into a project and forgot that she was a person, and that healing was going to happen in relationship with me. And so that when I started to realize how important I was in this story, and I realized that she had some behaviors that were very, for lack of a better word, triggering to me, and could create a reaction in me, and she often did them in order to get those reactions, to which I delivered them to her. And eventually, I think she was repelled by me. I think that, and you can't heal outside of relationship. That's just where it all happens. And so if I'm pushing her away with my reaction to her choices, then I'm really impacting negatively that relationship. So the first steps were all about me, and why does that embarrass me, or why does that bother me, or why do I feel disrespected by that, or like, it was kind of a lot of soul searching on my end and figuring out where my identity came from, and why did I care about what other people thought, or why am I prideful about that, or whatever. I had a bunch of confession to do on my own. Once my own little vessel got cleaner and healthier, which really just came through regular bouts of confession, then I was in a better position to be a minister of grace and of mercy, and to bring right and good words. When I said a minute ago, we listen and play, absolutely we do. The next kind of step of that is we give good words and we give good experiences, because that creates attachment. And man, it's so important to give good words and good experiences, and it's hard for me to do that if I'm feeling offended, or any of the things I can feel that are not good. So it took me a while to figure out how to create enough healthiness in me that I could give her good words and experiences. But that story turned around pretty fast once I realized what my role was in it, and it was several months, but I remember feeling like she walks in the room and looks for me. Like she's actually attracted to me, not repelled by me.
Right.
What can I do with that influence now? And
Yeah.
start to replace those lies with truth.
I love that. Now, and listen, your vulnerability is welcome here. I tell on myself all the time, and I can so relate to that. This is not about just steps A through E, and this will fix everything with your foster adoptive child. It really is so important for us to be willing to be introspective and explore our brokenness with the Lord before we can engage with the brokenness of our children that He's called
Yes.
us to love. And so I love that example, and you just affirming that in your own experiences. And obviously you have a lot of different venues in which you've experienced these types of relational building skills and seeing brokenness in different ways. And so that's why I value so much just your thoughts on all of this. And, as I think about it, Beth, and I would love for you to speak to this with the children that you've served in your own home and then through the ministry that you've shared with us. Kids process and deal with and internalize lies in very different ways, obviously. And some of them are louder than others, and some of them are very quiet. And so we don't always know the depth of their silent struggle, especially for our ones that are quieter, that will withdraw and that type of a thing. So would you, based on your experience, maybe share with us some behaviors that we need to be aware of in our children that would be evidence of them starting, lies starting to take root, intrusive thoughts starting to take root to affect their hearts, their minds, and ultimately their behavior?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, some of them, you're right, are loud and some of them are soft, but think triangulation, manipulation, control, violence, deception. Like those are all like red flashing lights. I'm afraid. That's what those really say. I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I'm afraid, and I need to take control of my own life, and I don't know how to do it. So I'm going to use these strategies, these protective strategies, and those protective strategies often are offensive to us. They frustrate us, and so once they frustrate us, then we think, okay, well, especially, I mean, aggression would be another one, and you have aggressive aggression and we have passive aggression, depending on their personalities. And when if I can control myself and my reactions and tell myself that child is afraid, they are functioning out of what we call their fear brain, their amygdalas, then I have empathy, compassion, I have a desire to make them feel safe. I'm not paying attention to their manipulation, triangulation, aggression, violence, control. I'm thinking, how can I make you feel safe and give you an appetite for that? Because again, with that set point, especially if you have a child enter your family a little bit later, it's as natural as breathing to be in an environment that's chaotic. It's as natural as breathing to be in an environment where you deceive in order to get what you want, or to be violent or control in order to get you want. So you have so much work to change that set point and that appetite, and that happens in environments where kids feel emotionally safe.
Yeah, that's really good. You mentioned triangulation and giving the example of you kind of wrapping yourself around your daughter to protect everybody else in your home. And so I would love to lean into that a little bit because, from a marriage standpoint, with triangulation as an issue, and I've seen this firsthand in multiple scenarios in the work that I do as well, and how that can wear down the marriage relationship when a child is very, very crafty at the triangulation and the manipulation and all that. So would you speak into partnering with your spouse in emotional regulation and just helping our kids through this when their behaviors are loud and unlovable, and you're trying to pour out as much as you can, protect, and also maintain unity as a married couple?
I mean, that is the $1,000,000 question. I have been married 31 years, and the story I'm going to tell you, we had been married 10 years, so this is about a little over 20 years ago. We had a house of 9 kids, and all kinds of storylines going on in those 9 kids. And I had never thought about budgeting my energy. I had only thought about budgeting my time or budgeting my money, but I'd never thought about my energy. I was giving my energy away to whoever wanted it as fast as they asked
Yeah.
for it.
Right.
And then I was getting to the end of the night and I didn't have a lot left. And part of what that marriage relationship needs is nurture, attention, connection. And so I was reading the books, the biblical books of poetry with some friends of mine, and I read this verse. It's Song of Solomon 2:15. It says, "Catch the little foxes that want to come into your vineyard and ruin it while it's in bloom." And my girlfriends and I were talking about what our foxes were, the things that try to ruin our vineyards when they were trying to bloom. And I told them, I'm not sure I've ever had this conversation with Todd. I don't know if I've ever told him what my foxes are. And that night we had a really good conversation. And some foxes are very innocent, like fatigue or busyness. And some foxes are more complicated. You know, they might be disappointment or anger or fear or body image or whatever. They could be more complicated. And we were realizing we were not going to accidentally become one in the midst of that household. In fact, if we didn't have an intention towards it, we were going to become roommates at best, or there's a lot of other versions that are at worst. So anyway, we decided 21 years ago that we would set aside, which feels radical, but 2 hours every night where we didn't parent our children, we didn't manage our home, we didn't work in our ministry. We were just going to be together. And it was a challenge in the beginning to get the rest of our household to understand Mom's not going to help with homework anymore, and she's not going to listen to you talk about your boyfriend breakup, because we had foster teen girls. She's now moving into wife mode, and so teens are putting herself to bed, and little people, you can't get out of bed, and this is now her time with her husband and with their dad. And in the beginning it was hard, but over time we started to call it the deepest breath of our day. And 20 years later, I can tell you, it's been extraordinary. It's the cement, it's what filled the tank for all the withdrawals that happened in the other hours of the day. And I'm sure that there's been some cost, but the benefit has far outweighed it. And so I think my counsel would just be create space for connection that have nothing to do with your children. And it makes problem solving, all the other stuff, much faster and unified.
Hey families, Summer here. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I wanted to make sure that you have subscribed. By subscribing to the Call to Love podcast, that means you will get notified with every new episode each week, and it helps me to know that you are here and a part of the Call to Love community. You can also leave my podcast a review and rate it, which helps others to find the show. This podcast is growing thanks to you, and we hope to continue reaching families who are looking for resources as they live out their own call to love. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, that's great advice, Beth. And it's honestly, it's very countercultural because we live in a very child-centered culture. And even within the adoption and foster community, you know, it can sound really good to make everything child-centered, but we are not doing a proper service to our kids if we are parenting them through a broken relationship or a relationship that's not as strong and unified as it should be. And so I love that you share that example, and I think that's really practical. And honestly, it challenges me. We're in a very challenging season. We don't have near the kids you do, but it's very busy. And so to require that time for the health of our marriage so that we can give our best to our kids, I think is such a great example. And as we think about, you're right, it's so draining to pour out and to absorb the big behaviors and the need to do the work day in and day out to reach their hearts and to teach them.
I think we later adopted a 12-year-old boy who today is 23, and he could take every ounce of energy I have in the day. If I wanted to, I could give him everything I have.
Yeah.
But whether I give him 100% or 40%, the result's pretty much the same. For him, he has about the same kind of day, whether I give him 40 or 100. But
Yeah.
the rest of my household has a very different day if I give them the remaining 60 or I give them nothing. And so realizing, okay, what what does it like what does my husband need today? What does the rest of my household need today? What does my challenging child need today? And not just giving it away without thought, but really making sure that the best parts of me go to the right places.
That is amazing. I love that concept of budgeting. And let me, while we're in that lane, Beth, because the first thing that pops in my brain, because a lie the enemy comes at with me constantly, is that if I don't give 100%, I'm going to fail my child and they're not going to thrive.
Yeah,
So, we're battling their lies and then we're getting hit with our own. And
totally.
so, how in the world do we reconcile that from a biblical perspective, understanding the weight of our calling, understanding the lies that are being spoken? We're given those limits of hours by God per day for a reason. How do we combat that guilt that might pop in our heads as parents?
Yeah, I think one is a testimony and one is just a challenge. My testimony is my kids are between the ages of 22 and 39, and a bunch of them are married, and I'm watching them have a marriage-centered home, and I'm watching them function out of the security that even if they saw tension between their dad and I at some point, they knew like they're going to figure it out because they've been sent both overtly and subvertly these messages. This relationship is primary and it's going to be
Yeah.
protected. And so
So good.
don't worry about what you're maybe seeing right now. This is our sin on display, but it's going to get worked out. And there's some security that I can see as adults now they've really benefited from. That's my testimony. But
Love
I
that.
think my challenge is, I think when my kids were like teenagers, I remember thinking, my gosh, I'm trying to give them the right shoes and braces and counseling and vacations and sports practices and family devotions and movie nights, like all the things. I'm trying to give them everything exactly the way perfectly they need it, and I'm inadvertently giving them the message life is all about them, and then I want them to leave my house and be like, oh, they're centered and unselfish and focused on what God's doing in the world. I'm like, I literally just spent 18 years making sure they knew it was all about them. Like, so somehow that like recognizing your needs are very important to me, and I'm going to do what I can to meet your needs, but I can't do it at the expense of other people in our family, and I can't do
Right.
it. I can't do it on the altar of what you want. I'm going to definitely meet your needs, and in that, you're going to get what you want, but it's not, I can't start with how do I do the best thing for you? And I know that sounds bizarre in a world where we are trying to do so very, very well for our children, and I love my children. I have 11 of them. I mean, I literally love children, I promise.
Yeah.
But you can't, it's not sustainable,
You're
especially
right.
not without resentment. At some
Right.
point, they're calling midlife crisis for women now, they're calling it the age of rage because they get to a
Wow.
point in the middle of their life and they're like, my gosh, I made it all about them, and I didn't have a healthy balance of my own growth and development. Again, not to be selfish, but to
Right.
be the healthiest version of myself so that I have things in the tank to spill over into them.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so fantastic, Beth. Yeah, I love that honesty, and you're right. And bring on the countercultural statements because we need to hear them. It needs to infiltrate. Because again, we're not doing our kids any service if we're not thinking correctly and things aren't ordered properly relationally in our homes. So, and as I'm thinking about this, emotions are God given, right? He created us as emotional beings. He experienced emotions, experiences emotions, and so where is the healthy balance in helping our kids to process emotions that are going to be felt, but also not allowing negative thought patterns to take hold with our kids? Where is that fine balance, Beth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that I remember when I gave birth to my first child. My first child was a birth child, and I was living in another country, and my mom called me in the hospital, and I was like, "Where are you? What am I doing? This is harder than I thought. It's
You're
hour
right.
5." And she just quietly said, "You are the world's foremost expert on Emma. Nobody knows her like you do." And she began to empower me in that beautiful maternal instinct that God gives us for our babies. And every child is different. So that child needs different kind of attention, parenting strategies than, let's say, her little brother. So
Right.
I don't think there's like just one answer to that question, but I think maintaining the kind of relationship with your child that allows you to see when negative thoughts start to impact their attitude and actions, and the kind of, like, this is silly, and again, this will sound, I suppose, controversial, and this was in part because I had a large family, but I used to say I want to spend 15 minutes alone with every child every day. And sometimes those 15 minutes was like, like a oil change. It was like just touch and base.
Yeah.
They all knew at some point they would have my undivided attention. And then sometimes that 15 minutes got like exposed. Somebody failed a math test or broke up with a girlfriend or whatever. And I realized this 15 minutes needs to be an hour and 15 minutes.
Right.
But I was finding out that information every day in real time. And that real time information gave me insight and perspective to challenge them when they had wrong thinking, to encourage them when they had wrong thinking, to be trusted when I was trying to replace wrong thinking with right thinking.
That's good.
So I think relationship, and like real time relationship, not the catch up kind where you go away with your kid and try to hope that makes up for the last 4 months or whatever. Like, but just like kind of that boring, like everyday real time connection.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work, a lot of good work that can happen in that kind of regular block and tackle.
That's so good. I love that real-time connection, real-time availability. That's a fantastic takeaway. Honestly, it's so practical, and we say this a lot, like it's so simple, but it's hard to do
Yeah.
because there's so many things that can take away from our day, and ultimately the enemy doesn't want us to be available in real time because he doesn't want to see healing. He doesn't want to see healthy emotional management. He doesn't want to see healthy relationship within the family unit. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so, Beth, you obviously have a huge platform about this. Listeners, I just finished one of her books last night called Throw the First Punch, and it is fantastic, all about spiritual warfare. So, Beth, I feel like it's important for us to address that spiritual warfare component in this scenario, that our kids are never too young to be attacked by the enemy. And maybe that's something that we don't think about commonly. So let's address that, and maybe just share from your own experience, and what advice you would have for parents to battle on behalf of their children when it comes to the spiritual warfare aspect.
Yeah, I mean, we sometimes assign human characteristics to our spiritual enemy, meaning like, "Ugh, he bothered us yesterday, surely he'll leave us alone today," or "this child's already hurting, nobody would try to hurt it more," or whatever. But he's just evil, and so he's attracted to blood in the water. And so when someone's hurting, he doubles down. And I think recognizing when a child is hurting and taking extra steps to teach that child how to spiritually protect themselves, and then to be actively interceding for them until they're stronger. I think there's a lot of really practical steps. I did write that book called Throw the First Punch, which is just about not taking a passive role in spiritual warfare, but having an aggressive posture and not being afraid to challenge an enemy and protect your household, your mind, your marriage, all the things. And in the aftermath of that book, I always got asked, when is it too early to teach kids about evil? I don't want to scare them about evil. And I would always answer, listen, Disney taught them about evil. They already know that there's evil. We just need to teach them how to protect themselves when it comes for them in the dark of the night, when it comes for them in the middle of a classroom, when it comes for them, they need to know how to take thoughts captive and to call out to Jesus and to use the tools they have.
That's so good. I love that. And a perfect example of a tool that we can employ is your latest children's book. So tell us a little bit about that as we close out.
Yeah, so I wrote a series called the Strong Heart series, and The first one was called The Heart Who Wanted to Be Whole, and it's just about that idea that the enemy can come and lie to us. And then all the books after that talk about a different tool that we have. So there's one about worship, and one about scripture, and one about community. And the one that gets released here this week is called The Heart Who Wanted to Lasso Thoughts. And it's about the artist. I'm not the artist. The artist did a fabulous job depicting lies like little bowls, and how those bowls can circle around our minds, and they can grow and grow, but we have the ability to catch them and to replace them with things that are true. And everything changes when we do that.
It's so sweet. Y'all, it's the sweetest story. We've been blessed to have an advanced reader copy of it, and I sat down with my now 11-year-old daughter when it came in the mail, and it was just such a blessing, especially for us. And of course, my first thought is, where was this 3 or 4 years ago when we were really trying to teach emotional language and we were struggling through identifying that? But how sweet to sit down as a point of connection with her and to look through that and kind of discuss it together. And she was like, I loved it, you know? So it was really, really sweet. So you have an endorsement from my 11-year-old Beth.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah, it's so, so sweet. Y'all, I'm just, Beth, we only just even barely scratched the surface of the insight that you have just around the calling of foster care and adoption. But I just want to say thank you for the work that you do, and for taking the time to share these beautiful resources and your time and your wisdom and your family's story. It means so much. Listeners, I will have all of the links in the show notes today for you to follow along in Beth's work, to grab a copy of the book, and also look at the other resources that she has created. She is a treasure in this community, and so I would love for you to lean more into her expertise. Beth, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom today on Called to Love. It's been such a pleasure.
No, it's been my joy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.